Okay, guys, so good evening once again. So from the previous class, we had looked at how to round off numbers in terms of whole numbers, decimal places, and significant figures. Now, today we are going to be looking at standard form. So I think we had started this some class ago, but we didn't get to finish it. So we're just going to go through it again so that everybody can benefit. All right, so standard form students. Anybody know anything about standard form? Let me see your hand. Anybody know anything about standard form? Miss Lang? Miss Lang, can you tell us what you know about standard form? Are you hearing me, guys? Raise your hand. Let me see if you're hearing me. Miss Waysome, you hearing me? Miss?
Sir, I'm just hearing you now. Good evening.
Oh, good evening. Miss Lang, are you hearing me? Are you hearing me, Miss Lang? Miss Trivia? Are you hearing me? Raise your hands, guys. Let me see those of who are hearing me because apparently some persons are not. All right, Miss Cummings, Miss Scott. Who else? Miss Waysome. Not seeing anybody else raising their hands. Miss Lang, are you hearing me? Miss Belani, are you hearing me? All right. All right, Miss Lang is hearing me. All right. All right, so standard form. Now, there are very large numbers that will have, what I must say, a large number of digits. And sometimes for the convenience of writing these numbers, we write them in a special form that we call standard form. Now, so standard form is a concise way to represent very large and very small numbers. For example, you have these numbers here. You can see that we have a long strings of figures, long strings of digits. And so it would be very inconvenient to be writing out these long strings of digits. Every time we have to write these numbers, it would take some amount of time and take up some amount of space on the page. And so you may want to write them in standard form. Now, especially for scientists are generally working with large numbers. And so standard form is a convenient way for them to write very large numbers in a concise way. Now, the British call it standard form. However, the Americans call it scientific notation. So it is the same thing, but it is being called by two different names. So the British call it standard form, the Americans call it scientific notation. All right, so what is it really? Now, standard form in the general form looks like this, all right? Now, if you look at this, you will realize that there is some number A times 10 raised to some number N, all right? So once you write any number in standard form, you're going to have a number which is represented by A times 10 raised to some power N. Now, N is well, let me start off with A. A is a number which is between 0 and 10. So A has to be some number that fall within that range from 0 to 10. Now, A cannot be 10. So in other words, A has to be a single, well, not a single digit number, but A has to be a number with a value less than 10. All right. So when you think of value less than 10, from 0 to 10, what are some values you could think of that are less than 10? Let's weigh some.
Yes, sir. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, sir.
All right. Very good, Miss Raysom. Now, even though we have those
Numbers falling between 0 and 10.
all right, so even though we may have those whole number values, what we also need to know is that values between 0 and 10 can take a decimal form. So if you have like 1.25, now that would also be a number that falls within the range from 1 to 9. Everybody is clear at that? Clear with that? So A can also be a decimal number, but the value of A cannot be more than 9. Is that, or cannot be 10? Can be 9.5, 9.8, or so on, but it cannot be 10. Is that clear to everybody? Raise your hand if it is clear to you guys. All right, good. Now, so in order to write any number in standard form, it means then we will have to be able to identify a value for A from the number that we're writing in standard form. So these two numbers that we have here, 0.000000123 and 678 with 10 zeros that follows. These numbers, if we were to write them in standard form, writing it in the form where we have a number A times 10 to the n, it means that from these numbers, we have to determine a value for A, and we have to determine a value for n. Now, whereas A can be any number from 1 to so A has to be a number less than 10, and it has to be greater than, say, 0. All right. Now, n here is an integer. What do you know about integer, students? What kind of number is integer? Miss Lang, what is an integer? All right, Miss Shay, oh, forgot, Miss Lang can't speak right now. Miss Shay, go ahead, what's an integer? Miss Shay, are you hearing me?
Yes, sir. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
So integers are numbers that are negative and positive.
Right. Thanks very much, Miss Shay. That means n will be either a negative or a positive number. Now, so it means that when we're finding n, we have to also determine whether or not n is positive or negative. So it means that we will have to follow a process in order to find these two numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and write the second one, which is the 678 with 10 zeros behind it. I'm going to go ahead and write that one in standard form as an example so that you can see how it is done. Now, is there anybody who knows how to write numbers in standard form and would like to assist me in the process? Ms. Shea? I see your hand still up.
Oh, sorry, sir. Let me know.
All right. Is there anybody who would like to assist in writing this number in standard form?
Sir, you mean the 60?
Right, that one.
Okay.
All right, so the first thing when you're writing a number in standard form, the number that you will be writing in standard form, all you need to do is to determine a value for A from that number, and then determine a value for N. Now, once you find a value for A, wherever A is in this form, you're going to replace A with that value that you find for A. And then after which you're going to determine a value for N. And whatever value N is after you determine that value, you're going to replace this N here in the form with that value. And then once you have done that, you would now have the number in standard form. So all you have to do is to find a value for A, find a value for N, and plug them in this general form, and you will get the number in standard form. Is that clear to everybody? Let me see your hands. Let me see the hands of those who understand exactly what I just said. Let me see the hands of those who...
Could you repeat, sir?
All right, I will repeat, Ms. Green. All right, so as I was saying, in order to write any number in standard form, this that we have here is the general form of standard form. So when you write a number in standard form, it's going to look something like that. However, the A that we have here in the general form has to be a number, which it has to be a number from, say, it has to be equal to 1 and less than 10. So A has to be a value equal to 1 less than 10. Now, A can also be a decimal value, but it just have to obey the rule that it has to be less than 10, from 1 to 10, or from 1, I should say, from 1 to, say, 9 point something, that those values can represent A, all right? N, on the other hand, has to be any integer. Now, for N, we're not going to be using any kind of decimals. So in other words, we're not using any rational number for N. We're using what? An integer. And the integer can either be positive or negative numbers. And I'm going to say positive or negative whole numbers, even though we don't refer to negative as whole numbers. But I think you'll understand what I mean by that. All right, so the first step in writing any number in this form, which is a standard form, from the number itself, we have to determine A. From the number also, we have to determine N. Once we determine what A is supposed to be, this A in the general form, we replace it with that number. And once you determine N, the power N here, that 10 raised to, so that power N must also be replaced with the number that you determined for N. Is that clear to you now, Ms. Green?
Yes, sir.
All right, so first thing then, we want to be able to find A. So we're going to start off first by finding A. So we're working with the number 6, 7, 8, and then we have 10 zeros. I think we have 10 zeros that follow. Is it 10 zeros? Yes. All right. Now, so to find A, the first thing we want to do to find A, you are to put a point put a point after the first non-zero digit from the left. So to find A, we first have to do what, students? First have to put a point or place a point in the position after the first non-zero digit from the leftmost position. So, Ms. Scott, what is the first non-zero digit in this number here? Are you there, Ms. Scott?
Sorry, 6.
6, right. Where should we put the point? Miss Scott, where should we put the point?
Sorry, in between the 6 and the 7.
Correct. So we're going to put a point between 6 and 7. Everybody understand that so far? So we put the point between 6 and 7. Now, after we have done that, then all the non-zero digits in that position, all the non-zero digits, which would be 6, 7, and 8, these non-zero digits now we use as A. Now, all the other zeros that follow, we are not going to be putting them in A, so we're just going to drop off these zeros. So A then is equal to what is A equal to, Ms. Green?
6.78, sir.
6.78. So everybody with me so far? So this is how we find A. All right. Now, after we find A, next we need now to find N. Now we say N can be a positive or a negative integer. All right. So now in order to find N, what we need to now consider, we need to consider where the point was before we place it between 6 and 7. Can anybody help me with that? Before we position a point between 6 and 7, where would you find the point in this number? Miss Waysam?
Answer, considering that it's a whole number.
All right, so Miss Waysam sounded a little bit like you were breaking up, but if you're hearing,
You heard me, sir?
I'm hearing it now, Miss Waysam.
That's what I was saying at the end, considering that the figure is a whole number.
All right, so once you have whole numbers, and by now everybody should know this, for a whole number, the decimal point would be at the end of the number. And because in our decimal system, after the point, we would have the fractional part. So whole numbers, the decimal point would be at the end. It's not customarily for us to write numbers with points at the end, but it should be understood that if you have a whole number, the point is at the end. So in this case then, the point would be at the end. That's it. And so it would have been here. This is where the point would have been. Now, in order to get N, we need to count from where the point was to where we now place the new point. So if we count from that position to where we now have the point at after the 6, then that number of position will give you N. So if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Now that tells you that n is 12. But what it doesn't tell you though, you don't know now whether or not n is positive or negative. Now to determine what sign n has, whether it is positive or negative, you now need to pay attention to which direction you were moving in. So in this case, we are moving from the n and we are moving, so in other words, we're moving from the right and we're moving to the left. So if you're moving from the right to the left, then n will be a positive number. So we know that the number of places tell you what n is, so n is 12, and the direction in which you move tells you that n is positive. So here we would have a positive 12. Now we don't need to write positive numbers with the plus sign in front of it for it to be positive. We know that if a number has no sign in front of it, it is understood that that number is positive. So here n is positive 12 and a is 6.78. So now writing this number in standard form, now that we know what a is, now that we know what n is, all we need to do is to replace the a in the general form with the value for a and replace the n with the value for n. So this number in standard form would be 6.78 times 10, and in this case, we're raising to the power n, and so n would be 12. So that would be the value when we write this number in standard form. Is that clear to everyone?
Yes, sir.
All right, so I have another number there, which I'm going to ask you now to write in standard form. So just do this one by yourself and write it in standard form. And as soon as you finish, raise your hand so that we can see what you get for your answer. All right, so I'm giving you at least about 2 minutes to do that. So all right, guys, so go ahead and write that number in standard form. So this is the number we want to write in standard form next. So as soon as you finish, raise your hand and let us look at what you have. All right, Ms. Waysome, what did you get for your answer?
1.23 times 10 to the 7th, negative 7, sir.
1.23
Times 10
times 10
to the 7th power, which would have been negative 7.
to the negative 7. Is there anybody else who actually got that number? Let me see your hand. All right. So, all right. So if you follow the procedure as we did before, you should get this number, 1.23 times 10 to the negative 7. All right. Let me walk it through for the benefit of those who might not be sure how we arrive at that. So following the procedure that we're just following for the other number, the first thing that we want to do is to find a value for A. And in order to find a value for A, you place the point after the first non-zero digit from the left of the number. So in this case, if you're reading from left to right, the first non-zero digit would be 1. And so you put the point after the 1. And then now, that number that you get with the rest of non-zero digits is now A. So A is actually 1.23. All right, so now that we know what A is actually 1.23. Next thing we need to do is to find N. Now, N now will be how many places you move from where the point was to where you now place the point. Now, the point was at between these two zeros here, so we'd move it and count the number of places where we get to the new position for the point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. So we get that N has to be 7, but in terms of the sign, we know that now we are moving in the direction from left to right. We're moving from left to right. It means that we're going to get a negative N. So the N here would be negative 7. So negative 7 will be the N. Now, once we know N, all we now have to do is to write the number from the general formula, replace A with 1.23, and the N, we replace it with negative 7. So this now would be 1.23 times 10 times 10 to the negative 7. And so that would be the number in standard form. Now, I hope everybody can see why we, in order to find A, why we actually put the point after the first non-zero digits. Because when we do that, when you read these numbers, 1.23 or 6.78, you'll see that these numbers are less than 10, because these are decimal numbers. So 1.23 would be a number from 1 to, say, 9. So this number would fall in the range from 1 to 9. 6.78 would fall in the range from 1 to 9. And so A has to be within that range. All right. And for N now, we just simply count how many places from where we move, from where the point was to where we now position the point to get A. We count how many places to determine N, and we note which direction to determine the sign of N. So if we're moving from left to right, N is negative. If we're moving from right to left, N will be positive. Is that clear to everyone? Let me see.
Yes, sir.
Those who understand exactly what I'm saying. Raise your hand, please. All right, now it's good to be able to write a number in standard form, right? And so we would have just learned how to do that. But also, suppose we were given numbers in standard form, and now you're asked now to write it back into regular form, or in other words, to write it back in the normal form. Now, this is something that you should also be able to do. So now I am just now going to see how well you are able to reverse the process of a number in standard form and to write it back in normal form. So I'm just going to put two numbers at random here, and I'm going to ask you to, so two standard form numbers, and I'm going to ask you to convert them back to normal form. All right, guys. So let's say that we have a number, say, 5.6 times 10. So let's call this 1. 5.6 times 10 to 7. And the second one, we're going to have 3.2 times 10 to the negative 8. Now your task is to write back these numbers in their normal form. And so whenever you're through doing so, you need to raise your hand. Ms. Waysam?
Yes, sir.
Your hand is still raised.
Oh, sorry.
All right. So as soon as you finish with the first one, you raise your hand, and then now we'll see what you get. All right, so I'm giving you 2 minutes to do this. So I'll give you that little bit of time to get that done still. All right, I see that Ms. Waysam is on the ball today. All right, before you go ahead, Ms. Waysam, let me see if there's anybody else who would be able to figure out this one. All right, so we'll keep you on hold for a little bit, Ms. Waysam. All right, Ms. Cumming, Mr. Campbell. All right, so, all right, let me ask Mr. Campbell to give us his answer for question 1. What is it that you get when you write this back in the normal form? Mr. Campbell?
5600000.
All right, so 5, 6,
7 zeros we have it, sir.
0. Tell me when to stop the zeros, Mr. Campbell.
Alright, so alright, sir. Alright.
That's it? All right. All right, so is there anybody else who got this number from, all right, so Miss Shea, Miss Waysam, Miss Cummings, who else? Miss Green, Miss Lang, all right. So, all right, so one way we can verify it is that we could write it, we could see how we get A. So if we place a point between the 5 and the 6, this is a whole number, so the point would already be at the end. We place a point between the 5 and the 6, it means that we're going to move 7 places to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right, so it is correct. So if you all got that one correct, then give yourself a pat on the shoulder, and that was good. Now, so I'm going to now ask you now to do the second one, and when you're through, you raise your hand. Miss Shay, your hand is still up. You finished already, Miss Waysam?
Yes, sir, I did.
You finished already? All right.
Yes.
We're moving ahead to the Miss Cummings, you finished too as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Miss Clark? All right, you're finished. I'm going to give Miss Clark a chance to share her answer with us. What is it? What is your answer, Miss Clark?
All right, sir, I have 0.0000. All right, so I have 1 0, then the point after that.
Just
Then I
help,
have
just help me to count the zeros as we move along.
right.
You are just going to tell me when to stop with the zeros.
Yes, sir.
And then
No,
now what else?
2.
Then I put 3, 2.
Yes, sir.
All right. Is there anybody else who got that answer?
Yes, sir.
All right, Mr. J, you got that answer. Miss Waysome, Miss Green,